This video, I want to talk to anyone who makes their income, their means of production remotely. In other words, they don't need to be stuck in one place. They can actually make a living online or through some other means where they could do it from anywhere. If this is you, I want to introduce you to an idea which we don't usually hear too much about, but it's becoming more and more an option today, and that is just lifestyle arbitrage. What I mean by that is you can go to different cities, different locations around the world, have the same kind of lifestyle or even far better at often a fraction of the cost of what you're paying right now. Many years ago, I was living in Perth, Australia. Now, great place to live. I love Australia, I love Perth. You can have a really high standard of living there. However, I did not need to live there. I really had no reason to live there. I was focused very much on my work, did not have much of a social life, young single guy, young 20s, and there was no real reason. Of course, I had family there, but besides that, there was no real reason to be there as opposed to living somewhere else where I could essentially live on half the amount. So I started to look around, and of course, being in Australia, the next closest continent, Asia. So I started to look around there, and I looked at places like Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Thailand. I looked at all these different places, and I thought, where could I go if it's for a year or possibly a lot more? Where would I like to set up as a new base? And I ended up picking Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I moved there in 2014, and I was able to get an apartment which was a little bit over, say, $1,000 at the time. And I'd started making decent money at that point, so that was okay to pay. In hindsight, it was way too big for what I needed. 3 bedrooms, balcony. I was able to suddenly go from living in, just out of this room that I was renting in a house to having this whole big apartment and being right in the city center. I was literally next door to the famous Petronas Twin Towers. And that was my first time I had ever lived in Asia. Now, over the years, I've lived in several different countries in Asia, Hong Kong being one of them. And I just want to tell you an example just to really illustrate this point. In Hong Kong, when I went there, I went to a part of Hong Kong called Wan Chai, and the rental that I was in, it was probably about, I would say, maybe 750 square feet. So it had this big living room, had this tiny little bedroom. So you had a queen size mattress. Besides that, barely any room to walk around, very little storage, and the bathroom was one of the smallest I've ever seen. This is very normal in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, space is running out. It's at a real premium. They build up and they really pack in those apartments. So people will literally live in little shoe boxes there, and they will pay an enormous amount compared to many other cities around the world. It's one of the most expensive. I think London is more, don't quote me on that, and I think New York as well, but I know that Hong Kong is right up there. But anyway, I was paying about $2,000 US a month, $2,000. And the bedroom was so small, I turned that into a little office, and I put the bed out in the living room, and that's how I lived. Now, it was great. It was great to live there. Hong Kong, it's an incredible place. It's one of those places that you have to visit. You've got to see it. Dining, the food, it's top notch. It's one of the best in the world. And of course, for business, it's a major financial center. It's a really happening place, really nice place to live, but it is expensive. Compare that to somewhere like Malaysia. For that same $2,000, instead of a 750 square foot place, I can get right in the city center something that might be 4 times the size and at a much higher quality as well. Much more spacious, and also in a much better located area too. So these are some of the things that you have to look at. Each different city that you're considering moving to, how far will your dollar stretch? And some cities are great value right now. Other cities are terrible value. They just are. When you put everything in perspective, the cost of renting, the cost of food, the cost of transport, some of these cities to fly into and out of are more expensive. Hong Kong, for example, it is right now with the flight prices, it's a more expensive place than, say, flying into Malaysia. It just is. So my point is, if you make a living not being tied down to a certain location, you've got to really evaluate out of your top 3 or 4 different choices, where is your dollar at its strongest purchasing power? Because you could live at twice the standard in one compared to the other. And people don't put enough thought and research into choosing which area. Sometimes they'll just go to a place and they'll think, okay, I love it here, I'm gonna move here. But they could literally live at a much higher standard if only they did a little bit of research. What I recommend you do is go and live in each one of these cities for at least a few weeks. Find an Airbnb, negotiate a good rate, and live there and get connected to a bunch of different real estate agents in several different areas that you would want to live in this city, and find out what are those average rental prices. Start with that, number one, then start with food. For example, another place that I've lived in is in Costa Rica. Now in Costa Rica, I wasn't in the city center. I was living in a more isolated area on the beach, but the cost of food there, it's actually quite expensive. I think it would be actually far more expensive than say in Malaysia, and probably also even than Hong Kong. As crazy as that sounds, it is. It's quite expensive to live there. So that's why I say go and live in these different areas and find all of this out. Look at your cost of electricity, cost of water, all those different utilities, and think carefully about which one you're going to select, because it's the difference between living like a king and just living at an average level. And why not go to a place where you can live like a king? That's it for today, and I'll see you tomorrow.